He saw a black woman in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood and assumed she was a criminal. He was about to learn a brutal lesson in respect, broadcast live for the world to see. He had no idea who he just messed with. The morning air in Maple Creek Estates was thick with the scent of cut grass and privilege. It was a neighborhood of manicured perfection, where even the silence felt expensive. Officer Kincaid liked it that way. For over a decade, his presence had been a part of that perfection, a silent promise to the residents that their serene bubble would remain undisturbed. His uniform was always pressed to a knife's edge, his boots held a mirror shine, and his standard-issue Ford Explorer was washed weekly. To the people who lived in the sprawling colonial homes, he was order personified. But Kincaid's order had its own unwritten rules, and rule number 1 was about to be broken. He saw her from 100 yards away. A black woman, walking with a steady, purposeful stride along a path marked with a polished brass sign, "Residents Access Only." She wore a gray Arc'teryx jacket, designed for alpine conditions, and Hoka running shoes that had seen miles of rugged terrain. A sleek, black Osprey daypack was secured tightly to her back, and her hair was braided in precise, functional cornrows. Nothing about her suggested she was lost or aimless. To Officer Kincaid, that was precisely the problem. Her confidence was an anomaly, a disruption to the landscape he was paid to keep sterile. He didn't turn on his lights. He simply pulled his vehicle to the curb, a silent, imposing block of white and blue, and stepped out. His movements were deliberate, honed by years of projecting authority without needing to raise his voice. Amara Cole felt his eyes on her long before he spoke. It was a familiar pressure, the kind she had felt in crowded markets in Kandahar and on desolate mountain trails. It was the gaze of a man who saw not a person, but a problem to be solved. She was 40 years old, and her own eyes, deep-set and weary, held the weight of battles he could never imagine. She calmly paused her audiobook and pulled out her earbuds, her expression unreadable. "Ma'am," Kincaid began, his voice deceptively mild. He stopped a calculated 10 feet away. "This path is for community residents. I'm going to need to confirm your right of access." Amara met his gaze. It was a gaze that had assessed threats from a kilometer away, a gaze that had held firm while dressing the wounds of fallen comrades. It did not waver. "I'm walking," she said, her voice a low, steady alto. The simplicity of her answer irked him. He was used to fumbling explanations, nervous apologies, or aggressive defiance. Her calm neutrality was a challenge. He took a step closer, his posture shifting from inquiry to interrogation. "That's not what I asked," he said, his tone hardening slightly. "I need to see some identification." "And what's in the pack?" As per community regulations, non-residents carrying high-capacity parcels in this area are subject to inquiry. He was weaponizing jargon, twisting civic rules into a pretext. It was a game he played well. But Amara Cole was not a player in his game. She was a master of a different set, one with far higher stakes. "Officer," she began, her voice retaining its unnerving calm. "Under the Fourth Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion of a specific crime to demand identification. Walking is not a crime. As for my backpack, you have no legal basis to inquire about its contents without a warrant or probable cause." She wasn't quoting a slogan she'd seen online, she was reciting law with the precision of a drill instructor. For a split second, a flicker of disbelief crossed Kincaid's face. He had expected fear or anger, not a legal lecture. The woman standing before him wasn't just uncooperative, she was composed, informed, and entirely unintimidated. He saw her, a 40-year-old black woman in athletic gear, and his mind, conditioned by a decade of unchallenged bias, refused to compute. He was Officer Kincaid, the pillar of Maple Creek Estates. And this woman, this anomaly, was questioning his authority on his turf. The quiet hum of the neighborhood faded. The confrontation had begun. The moment hung in the humid air, stretched taut between Kincaid's rigid authority and Amara's unyielding calm. And then, the neighborhood began to watch. It started subtly. Across the street, at an artisanal coffee shop called The Daily Grind, a woman in expensive yoga pants paused her conversation and glanced over. Her phone, resting beside her oat milk latte, was discreetly angled toward the scene. She didn't press record, not yet, but she was watching. A few houses down, the rhythmic hiss of a lawnmower sputtered to a stop. A Latino gardener, his face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, leaned against his truck. He pulled out an old Android phone, its screen cracked, and held it low, filming through the dusty passenger side window. He had seen this scene before, with different faces but the same script. This time, he decided, he would have a copy. The siege was silent, digital. It grew, phone by phone. A teenager, no older than 17, wobbled to a stop on his skateboard. He flipped open his iPhone, his thumb immediately going to the TikTok app. He didn't start a dance trend, he went live. "Yo, check this out," he muttered into his mic, his voice a hushed whisper. "Cop hassling a lady in Maple Creek. For nothing." The view counter on his screen began to climb. 1, 10, 50 people were now watching from wherever they were. Inside her pristine home, a woman pushing a stroller past her bay window saw the standoff. She was a young, white mother, new to the neighborhood. Her first instinct was to pull the blinds. Her second, the one that won, was to step back into the shadows of her living room and raise her own phone, its cinematic mode blurring the edges of her manicured lawn and focusing squarely on the two figures in the street. A secondary conflict simmered within the growing crowd of onlookers. A young man put a restraining hand on his girlfriend's arm as she raised her phone. "Babe, don't," he whispered, his eyes darting toward Kincaid. "Don't get involved." She pulled her arm away, her voice a fierce, low hiss. "If we don't get involved now, when do we? When it's one of us." She kept filming. Officer Kincaid was aware of the phones. He saw the glint of sunlight off a dozen different lenses. But in his mind, he dismissed them. Phone warriors, he thought with a familiar sneer. They film because they're too scared to act. He had weathered citizen recordings before. They were a nuisance, nothing more. A tool for lawyers to haggle with later. His body camera was off, an oversight he'd justify later as a malfunction, but he felt secure in the fortress of his badge and the systemic silence that had always protected him. He failed to notice the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the passive quiet of a peaceful morning. It was the charged, attentive silence of a jury. Every phone was an eye, every recording a sworn testimony waiting to be heard. The air grew heavy with unspoken questions. The whir of a drone, operated by a tech enthusiast 2 blocks away, added a high-pitched, insect-like hum to the atmosphere. The gardener's live feed was being shared in a local community WhatsApp group. The teenager's TikTok was now being mirrored by accounts in other cities. Amara remained still, the anchor in this swirling vortex of digital observation. She knew they were there. She felt their collective gaze. Some were filming out of fear, some out of a sense of civic duty, some out of a morbid curiosity. But they were all watching. And their silent, digital presence was building a wall around the scene, one that Officer Kincaid, in his arrogance, couldn't yet see. He was no longer confronting a single woman. He was standing trial in a courtroom with no walls and 1,000 witnesses. The silent siege of cameras should have been a warning. For a different kind of officer, it would have been a signal to de-escalate, to find a face-saving exit. But for Officer Kincaid, the sea of lenses was an affront. It was a challenge to the very authority he believed was absolute. His pride, brittle and inflated, began to crack. He took another step, closing the distance until he was towering over Amara. "I've given you a lawful order to provide identification," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl meant to intimidate. "Your refusal constitutes obstruction." Amara didn't flinch. Her gaze remained locked on his. "Your order was not lawful." That was it. That was the final challenge he could not tolerate. The quiet, factual refutation from this woman, in front of his audience, was more galling than any shouted insult. With a swift, practiced motion, he reached out. It wasn't a gentle touch. He snagged the strap of her Osprey backpack, his knuckles brushing her shoulder, and yanked. It was an act of physical assertion, a move designed to unbalance and dominate. The crowd gasped as one. The sound was a sharp, collective intake of breath. But Amara didn't stumble. Her core, forged in years of grueling physical conditioning, held her firm. Her feet remained planted as if rooted to the earth. She simply absorbed the force. The only change was in her eyes. The weariness was gone, replaced by a glint of pure, cold steel. Kincaid, enraged by her stability, escalated. "Turn around. Hands on the car." "Now," he barked, the command ripping through the morning quiet. For a long moment, Amara did nothing. Then, slowly, with a control that was more defiant than any struggle, she turned and placed her palms flat on the hot, white hood of his patrol car. Her posture was perfect, her spine straight. It was the stance of someone complying, but on her own terms. The sight was jarring, this composed, powerful woman forced into a position of submission. In the crowd, the child who had been watching from his mother's arms asked in a clear, high voice that carried across the street, "Mommy, why is that policeman being mean like a movie villain?" The question, in its innocence, was a devastating indictment. Kincaid heard it. His face flushed a dark, mottled red. He had lost control of the narrative. He was no longer the hero of this story. And then, he made his final, irreversible mistake. Driven by a surge of pure, frustrated rage, he moved behind her. He placed one hand on her back and with the other, he shoved the back of her head downward. There was a sickening crack as her forehead and sunglasses struck the metal of the hood. The designer sunglasses flew off, shattering on the pavement. A thin, dark line of blood welled up on her temple, a stark crimson thread against her brown skin. It trickled slowly, tracing a path down her cheek before dripping onto the pristine white paint of the car he polished so meticulously. The world went silent for a heartbeat. Then it exploded. "Oh my God! He assaulted her," a woman screamed. The TikTok live stream was flooded with a torrent of shocked comments. The gardener, who had been filming silently, now swore loudly in Spanish, his voice filled with fury. But amidst the chaos, Amara did not scream. She did not struggle. She simply pushed herself up slowly, her breath hissing out between her teeth. She turned her head, the blood smudging her cheek, and her eyes, now terrifyingly calm, found Kincaid's. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, yet it cut through every other sound. "Do you know, officer," she said, each word a perfectly shaped shard of ice, "that it would take me less than 1 second to neutralize you? The only reason I haven't is out of a final, lingering respect for that uniform. As of right now, that respect is gone." Amara's words fell into the chaos like a stone into a churning pool, creating a sudden, shocked silence. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, delivered with a chilling certainty that paralyzed Officer Kincaid. He saw in her eyes not the anger of a victim, but the profound capability of a warrior. For the first time that day, a sliver of genuine fear pierced his armor of self-righteousness. Before he could process this terrifying shift, a new voice cut through the air. It was the voice of an older man, clear and steady, imbued with an authority that had nothing to do with a badge. "Leave her alone. You have no idea who you're touching." All heads turned. Standing at the edge of the curb was Mr. Gable, a retired history teacher known throughout the community for his quiet dignity. He leaned on a simple wooden cane, his eyes fixed on Kincaid with a look of profound disappointment. "I know that woman," Mr. Gable continued, his voice resonating with purpose. He took a deliberate step forward. "Her name is Amara Cole. In 2011, my son was a medic with the 10th Mountain Division, pinned down in Kandahar. His unit was ambushed, communication was lost. Amara Cole's team was sent in. They were almost entirely wiped out. But she, alone, brought 13 civilians and wounded soldiers, including my son, out of that kill zone. With no air support. A wave of stunned murmurs rippled through the crowd. The name, Amara Cole, began to spread in hushed, disbelieving whispers. Mr. Gable pointed a trembling finger at Amara. I have a picture in my study of her team. The official records blacked out her face, but my son never forgot it. And you just slammed her head against a car for walking. The revelation was a seismic shock. The narrative didn't just shift, it was utterly obliterated and rewritten in an instant. The woman they saw as a potential suspect was a decorated war hero. As if on cue, a new player entered the scene. A FedEx truck screeched to a halt. The driver, a formidable Latina woman in her late 30s, jumped out, leaving the engine running. She marched directly toward a local news crew that had just arrived. Get your camera on me, she commanded, her voice ringing with the authority of a drill sergeant. My name is Sergeant Maya Torres, United States Marine Corps, retired. I served at the same forward operating base as Captain Cole. She used Amara's former rank, and the word captain hung in the air with immense weight. The people in the system, we called her the ghost, Maya said, looking directly into the camera lens. Because she would take on impossible missions, succeed where everyone else had failed, and then disappear from the reports as if she were never there. She was too good, too efficient, and didn't fit the mold, so they kept her in the shadows. Today, you all forced her into the light. A young reporter, his hands shaking, was furiously typing on his phone. He found a heavily redacted after-action report on a secure veterans forum, mentioning a female operative, call sign Ghost, responsible for a legendary hostage rescue. He held his phone up to the main camera, providing instant, electrifying corroboration. The unmasking was complete. Kincaid stood frozen, his face ashen. The crowd was no longer a collection of individuals, it was a unified body of shame and awe. He looked at Amara, at the trickle of blood drying on her cheek, and he didn't see a suspect anymore. He saw the living embodiment of a heroism he had just desecrated. His authority, his power, his entire sense of self, evaporated under the harsh morning sun. He had tried to make her small, and in doing so, had revealed just how small he truly was. The moment Maya Torres finished speaking, the scene transformed. It was no longer a local dispute, it was a national story breaking in real time. The dominoes began to fall, fast and hard. Within the hour, the footage, a damning composite of the TikTok live stream, the gardener's steady shot, and the news crew's high-definition recording, was the lead story on every major news network. The hashtags #Justice for Amara Cole and #Badges Not a Blank Check exploded across social media, trending globally. The raw video of Kincaid shoving Amara's head into the car, followed immediately by Mr. Gable's and Sergeant Torres's testimony, created a narrative so powerful and unambiguous that there was no room for spin. The official reaction was swift and unprecedented. The chief of the Maple Creek Police Department, a woman known for her carefully worded, defensive statements, appeared on a live broadcast that evening. Her face was grim, her tone devoid of the usual bureaucratic equivocation. The actions of Officer Kincaid were appalling, she said, staring into the camera. They represent a profound betrayal of the public trust and the values of this department. He has been suspended indefinitely, pending termination, and the State Bureau of Investigation has taken over the case. The words, State Bureau of Investigation, sent a shockwave through the local precinct. This was no longer an internal matter to be quietly managed. Files were suddenly locked, emails were scrutinized, and a palpable fear settled over the officers who had, for years, enabled or ignored Kincaid's behavior. In the station's records room, a young black policewoman, who had seen the broadcast, walked silently to a filing cabinet. She pulled out a report she had filed a year ago against another senior officer for racial profiling, a report that had been dismissed as unsubstantiated. She made a copy and slipped it into her personal bag. The first internal domino had tipped. The fallout spread beyond law enforcement. Veterans organizations across the country released scathing statements. A coalition of former Special Operations soldiers, many of whom had served with Amara, issued a joint letter demanding not just Kincaid's termination, but a full-scale federal investigation into systemic discrimination within the armed forces and law enforcement. She was a ghost in the system because the system was too cowardly to acknowledge her, the letter read. We will not allow her to be a ghost now. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, announced it was representing Amara Cole pro bono and was launching its own independent investigation into the Maple Creek Police Department's patterns and practices. Amara herself remained silent. She was taken to a secure location, her minor injuries treated. She declined every request for an interview. She released no statement. Her silence was more powerful than any soundbite could have been. It forced the world to focus not on her reaction, but on the actions that had victimized her. Kincaid, holed up in his suburban home, watched his life unravel on a 65-inch television screen. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, internal affairs, and a union representative who sounded less than optimistic. He was no longer a pillar of the community, he was a pariah, the face of a national scandal. His perfectly ordered world, built on a foundation of prejudice and unearned power, had crumbled to dust in a single morning. The street full of silent witnesses had become a nation of loud accusers, and the dominoes were still falling. In the weeks that followed, the story of Amara Cole evolved. It ceased to be about a single incident and became a catalyst for a deeper conversation. The name Kincaid faded, but the questions his actions raised echoed across the country. Amara, true to her nature, vanished from the public eye. After giving a single, confidential statement to state investigators, she left town. There was no press conference, no victory tour. She sent a short, anonymous postcard to Mr. Gable. It read, "True strength isn't winning the fight. It's creating a world where the fight isn't necessary. Thank you for seeing me." Then, she was gone. Rumor had it she had taken a job as a park ranger in a remote national park in Wyoming, trading the battlefield for the quiet majesty of the mountains. But she left a permanent mark on the landscape she departed. In Maple Creek Estates, the community was forced into a period of uncomfortable self-reflection. The incident gave rise to a new phenomenon known as the watcher's stance. When a police stop occurred, residents would no longer just drive by or film from a distance. They would stop, stand at a respectful but visible distance, and simply bear witness. They didn't interfere, they just were there. Crime statistics didn't change, but complaints of police misconduct in the district dropped by nearly 70% in the following year. The silent siege had become a permanent, silent watch. At the site of the confrontation, local art students, with the community's blessing, painted a mural on a retaining wall. It depicted not a face, but a silhouette, a woman standing tall, her back straight, surrounded by the faint outlines of other figures watching over her. Beneath it, a simple inscription, "To stand when it is hard." The story became a teaching tool. In civics classes, law schools, and police academies, the video was analyzed not for its drama, but for its lessons in de-escalation, bias, and the power of citizen oversight. A high school in Chicago started the Witness Project, encouraging students to document and discuss instances of injustice in their own communities. The ripples reached the highest levels. Spurred by the public outcry and pressure from veterans groups, Congress passed a bipartisan bill mandating new, stricter standards for reporting and investigating claims of discrimination within all branches of federal law enforcement and the military. It was unofficially nicknamed the Ghost Act. The final chapter for Officer Kincaid was written not in a courtroom, but in a sterile administrative letter. He was terminated, his law enforcement certification permanently revoked, and he was barred from holding any future public service position. The system, for once, had held its own accountable. Amara Cole never sought the title of hero, and she actively rejected it. But her legacy was not in a title, it was in the actions of millions of people who learned from her. It was in the teenager who chose to stand watch instead of walking by. It was in the young officer who found the courage to report a superior. It was in the community that learned that safety isn't built on exclusion, but on mutual respect. The woman was gone, but the echo of her stance remained, a quiet, persistent reminder that sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to be brought to their knees. What would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, but please comment with respect for everyone involved. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more content that makes you think.